It involved. I wasn't here when the first easement was put on. But you know, if you compare to the donations that you're going to talk about after this, there were 6 development rights being extinguished, 10 development rights, and 3 development rights. Compared to this, you're not distinguishing anything. You're just doing nuanced work with that other stuff. So that's why I'm here. I'm really speaking to that development right part of it and the value that goes with it.
Okay. So just quickly to understand your policy a little better. So if there were certain agricultural activities on this parcel, it may still qualify for land use by virtue of those agricultural. It's different than open space values, but it still potentially could be.
Potentially could.
Okay.
Yes, with active use.
Active use.
Yes.
Got it. Yeah.
Not with forestry because there's not enough acreage on it.
Sure, got it.
But it might come in as you might see it apply as agriculture.
It could
It's
if
just-
that's permitted on there, yes, and it had an active use, yes. Thank you.
This makes, but this,
Thank you.
hold on, I'm not done.
I'm sorry.
This makes me kind of fundamentally uncomfortable because it seems like if this property were 15 miles out, exactly the same, less of a tax base, exact same scenario, would you be here?
Yes, it's not really the question of the value. I did point that out to begin with, but the lack of what we're giving up. I mean,
Okay.
you are still a 21 acre parcel 15 miles away would still be worth quite a bit of money. And we'd still be giving that up compared to the loss of no development rights. And these other nebulous, I'm sorry,
Understood.
that's my word, nebulous.
It's our, yeah,
So,
conservation values.
yes.
What they
Conservation.
are. All right, thank you, Mr.
All right, thank you.
I mean, although I'm very hesitant to get economic considerations in this particular corral conservation, because you could negate every conservation easement that has ever been done. I mean, simply the IRS deductions make that point. I mean, you don't get a 40% reduction because you didn't do anything, you know. I mean, notwithstanding the fact I would not want to base a decision on economics ever here. I'd say Mr. Lynch voices in a very different way my concern about our guidelines and whether we should take on projects that basically don't reduce the development potential. On Ivy Creek, I think it's different because it's a really important, water supply question there. So I would be very happy to see 37A. I would be not very happy to see the eastern pink of C3 there.
As
I would
part
just
of-
assume that stayed as God flang it. And didn't have an easement on it because very clearly the planning department is saying unequivocally, there is no more development potential there, full stop. And I understand that there are ancillary buildings that could come in, but I would risk that myself. You know, amendments are dicey, as Lee knows full well. And they're risky to both the donee and the donor. So I think when you do one, you need to be on really solid footing if you're gonna do them. And I feel squishy at footing at present moment.
Having walked a lot of land over the years.
And it ain't just a 12 inches of rain.
So what would that look like if C3 wasn't included, but 37A was? Would there still be the to be built 6,000 foot dwelling? And that would be all?
But you wouldn't permit, what I'm suggesting is that you add, I guess it's 19 acres, you said, from 37A, simply add it as an additional acreage to the easement. And I guess we have to have a buffer provision that's a little stronger, because I don't think we have any Ivy Creek frontage originally.
tiny bit.
Yeah, none.
The north hip
Um,
west corner.
But in other words, I would suggest a simple easement that adds acreage, but only on this side. So you wouldn't adjust the number of houses. I mean, you wouldn't jack the houses from 1 to 3. And I understand my opinion may not be the same as anybody else's, but I just articulating how it falls out for me.
I'm gonna, yeah, I feel like we're all heading in the same direction, that the 37C3 doesn't merit, doesn't have a pull, so to speak, in terms of conservation values and diminishment of extinguishing of development rights to warrant an amendment. And then 37A would be really nice to have it also. But then there's also that it seems like within this too, along with the amendment, there is one more dwelling that would be added in, correct?
2 more dwellings, both of them already.
Both already
But if
existing.
you don't do 37C, you don't need the 2 dwellings.
Right, exactly.
So that's why I would like to leave it simple and just add rather than
Add 19 acres to this.
than add something that seems to me to be potentially, at least on paper, looking like private benefit.
Right, I mean. Adding the 19 acres of 37A. And then also taking a look again at the change in the, maybe the agricultural use in terms of allowing the invasive species control element in it as well.
Yeah, because you get the buffer that way, and I just can't see. I mean, we're going from this buffer configuration to this buffer configuration. It's not that much of an improvement.
No.
To get that.
An improvement for staff for monitoring and enforcement, and that we can far more easily find the location of the 520-foot elevation buffer than you can find 600 feet from where the floodplain was when this.
Sure.
Yeah, I like the quantitative aspect.
But you could do that.
The old one with my idea.
Man, is it worth it? For the
If you could
convenience of the
build that
staff?
in
I don't get that.
And just not do 37C3. And you could take all the other stuff that you're trying to get, natural resource wise. And it looks like there really isn't anything on 37C3 that you're trying to get as far as natural resources go.
There's a 100-foot buffer on the pond, which half of which is.
And I
Yeah.
think that was ill-advised from the get-go, but never mind.
There is a restriction on house size, so 60, again, in this part of the world, 6,500 square feet is modest. right?
Mid-range.
Mid-range, and
Modest.
so,
Yeah, location of accessory structures as well. And we, of course, would take whatever we all decide to the owner, but I don't know that she would be inclined to grant an easement on 37A without 37C3 being included, because as I mentioned, one of the main goals is to eliminate the awkwardness of part of C3 being under easement, part of it not being under easement, and to have a common regime for all of the holdings there. So,
We don't exist for the convenience of the landowner.
All right, so I feel like we need to move this along.
They created when they did the boundary line adjustment, they created the confusion. It's just pure.
Mhm.
Somebody make a.
Is there a
we can make a
motion?
motion.
Yeah, so what type of motion that we would accept this as is if 37C3 were not part of it? Which we heard would probably not be accepted now.
And when you say as is, you mean the easement
The-
stays as is, or the amendment with the
Proposed.
3 houses stays as is?
Well, I'm not comfortable with the 3 houses.
No, me either. I'm not comfortable with anything more than what was in the original easement, I
Correct.
have to say.
And
Unless
if you leave out C3, that's where the other two are that exist. You'd still have all of that with 6,000 square foot dwelling. Right. So you don't care, you don't get to count those two because they didn't come into these.
Well, with or without the amendment, they end up building a residence on C1, right? Where the new one is proposed to be anyway, or I guess there's one on 37C. That's brand new, right? That doesn't exist.
There's
that correct?
currently an equipment shed. One of those buildings is an equipment shed that currently exists. The second one is a small farm office that is not built. But would be permitted under the existing.
An amendment or no amendment, the house that's on, it's encircled in red on 37C1. It's built either.
Maybe not in that location because there's no building envelopes.
Yeah, but there's a buffer.
Does anybody have the words
No.
for a motion?
Richie's here now.
Well, I mean, you know, my suggestion is the way you're going is it's a radical change to what the proposal is. We don't know whether the donor would accept it or not. I guess my thought would be is if this body is considering only accepting a donation of 37A, that you charge staff to go back and work with the donor to see if they can come up with a proposal that would only include 37A.
That would be my motion.
I just don't know that we can wordsmith it and doctor it up here and then it would go back to the donor and again, we'd be back in the same boat of either,
Whether y'all feel the need to do the motion, I think we understand what.
Instructions are.
It may not be what you want, but if we made a motion that we would accept an amendment that where everything stayed the same except the natural resource things and the addition of 19, so they didn't have to come back to us. I mean, it is October.
Right.
Would that be an okay? I mean, I would make that motion
much
so
go
that.
over my head as to the natural resources.
Well, this business of getting rid of the dubious floodplain thing and taking on the, what do they call it, forest protection and doing a 35-foot buffer on the Ivy
I
Creek.
guess my point is that we could try to hammer out the language right now, and then it goes back to the donor and they either one want to come back and renegotiate it or just say no. So I guess my preference would be in order for accuracy's sake to have staff work with the donor.
I think, yeah, I agree, and I think a lot of the language is in the proposed amendment. Some of the details are, it's more just the general brushstroke of not having 37C3 in there.
I mean, I feel comfortable that we could come back in November. I mean, council has done, when I say council, I mean, Lee and Rebecca, they've done 95% of the work already. So I feel perfectly comfortable that if the donor is willing to adjust the easement, that we could come back in November. I believe we are going to meet in November, and we could have it all done and recorded.
And it's probably not a huge tax consequence the way the other one might have been, so.
Do not know. I can't offer an opinion on that.
I mean, 19 undevelopable acres isn't going.
What would be the date of our next meeting? I might be out of town.
So I have it right here. Hold on.
Second Thursday.
November 14th, or the next meeting.
So,
I'll be at.
I don't know if we're gonna grant a visa for
Don't need a visa anymore.
that.
The Carrie's point, if you all want to make the motion that you accept the amendment everything in the amendment except the addition of the acreage from 37C3, then if that happens to work out okay, and the donor is willing to accept it, then as Sherry pointed out, we can just proceed. If for some reason there's an issue, we can always come back in November and provide the detail. At least that would give us.
That doesn't require, redrafting or recreating any language. We just use the language that exists right now, except we would be excluding
We're changing is the legal description.
C3.
Right.
And of course,
Well, we have to exclude the two new houses and we have to do the,
Well,
Change
if we,
that
if
600
we,
foot
if
thing?
we, if we exclude C3, that goes.
you know,
Yeah, it's
that-
just gotta be reflected in the language.
Yeah, I just wanted to be that the deed, when we're saying we use all the same language, that we don't use the amendment language that says, now you get 3 houses on 70 acres or whatever. it be.
No, I think that's pretty.
I think that's the most efficient way from our perspective to do it, and then.
I mean, I'm happy to make that motion if we think it's clear enough and if you're comfortable with it, Richie.
I mean, I think we can work with, I think it's easier to work with that, and then if we need to fine tune it, we can come back. I mean, the motion would be to accept the proposal, accepting all land, all
37A.
improvements under 37 C3, and it would almost be, it would be the portion that's under the open space use agreement.
Well, if we can just use the parcel number so we don't.
We can't because part of it is under a permanent conservation easement, and when they do the boundary line adjustment, there's gonna be a swath that's still gonna be under the conservation easement. So what you're excluding is well, unless you want to do something different, but you're excluding the portion that's under the open space use agreement as of right now. The balance of it, it's under a permanent conservation easement.
There's no way that the taxing department would just give it a separate parcel number to get away from this kind of difficult thing in the future, of keeping track of it.
I mean, the way they're doing the boundary line adjustment, it's gonna
Basically,
Oh, they're gonna need to cut through it.
Well, that's fine.
C3 is gonna have, I don't know how big of a swath, and Rebecca can speak to it better than I can, but it's kind of that middle area with kind of splitting the pond, is that right?
Goes right
Splitting the pond is under a permanent conservation easement.
Well, it was a separate parcel, it's 37B for the boundary.
But what's 37B?
Yeah, when it went under easement, it was 37B, and then they did a BLA and then made it all one big 37. C3.
37 C3.
So we could say that we're excluding the former 37B.
37B is already under the easement.
You know, the former 37B is already fully
It's
covered.
the former 37C3.
But there's nothing built on that old 37B, right? That aren't any improvement.
just
Oh,
Oh,
but no dwelling.
okay, I thought 37B, old 37B was the pink bit over here.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, that won't work then, sorry.
all right, so the motion,
All right, so I'll make a motion that should an amendment be brought to us or be brought to the authority embodied by Scott over there.
Maybe, I'm sorry, but maybe don't phrase it as if it's brought to the authority, because if the goal is to not have to bring it back, then it would be cleaner if the motion was just to accept the proposal with the following change.
Okay.
I mean,
all
I
right.
propose a motion that says that this
and then I can sign it without.
Conservation Easement Authority will accept an amendment to the easement as proposed, but accepts the portion of 37 C3 that is under the open space use agreement and excludes all terms and conditions that apply to that portion.
Which would cover the house, that extra house.
We're just ignoring that. Everything that has to do with 37C3, that's under the open space use agreement, and that's identified. Well,
Also say the portion of 37C3 that's not currently under easement.
saying that's the.
Okay.
it's the same.
Yeah, okay, if we say it that way, what I'm worried about is memorializing the idea that we have effected this economic argument.
Yeah.
And so that I don't want it to look as if this motion has exempted the portion under the open space agreement just in order to keep the county revenue.
The problem with that is.
So if we call it something as he just described, then we don't do that, and that seems a good
Didn't
thing.
hear what Scott said.
Within 20 years' time, it'll be hard for us to know what portion of that land was under the open space use agreement.
Because it's going away anyway.
Okay,
That's all we needed to get over the hump for this approval, that doesn't become part of the. Union.
in essence, we're just,
Unless you can keep that line somehow on the plat or on the easement,
right, that's the
the
only
recorded
difficult
easement plat,
Is shown on exhibit A.
right?
All right, so do we have to reword this motion, or has Sherry made the motion?
Well, I think I made somewhat of a motion. It's a little cobbled together.
What I wrote down is that the motion is for the authority to accept the amendment as proposed. But accepting the portion of 37C3 that is not currently under easement in any related improvements in that area.
And the house provisions that had to come along because of that.
Right. Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for sticking around. All right. Does you pronounce snake Caldejon or Caldejon? Caldejon? Okay.
So, second item on the agenda is, for the rest of it is more straightforward. This one is a donation proposal from Albemarle. It is about 190 acres on Jarman's Gap Road, west of Crozet. To the north, you have the pink Springs. Immediately to the east, the neighboring property is the King family vineyards, and across the road to the north is Yonder Hill Farm, which is an easement that the authority recently. The Caldejon proposal came to the authority in May last year. That proposal only included the two smaller parcels closer to the road. This one now includes the larger parcel behind them, which includes the two dwellings, which makes it a substantially different proposal now. Let's say 180 acres, approximately 6 potential dwellings eliminated. For the natural resources on the property, we've identified approximately 1,500 feet of living concrete and 17 acres of 100-year floodplain. That's in the watershed of the South Fork Reservoir. The property also includes approximately 181 acres of important agricultural soils and shares just over 9,000 feet of boundary with existing conservation easements. It is in the Greenwood Afton Rural Historic District, but it's listed as non-contributing. The proposed terms of the amendment. Currently, the property of 3 separate parcels all under single ownership. And the proposal would permit no more than 2 separate ownerships with a minimum size of 45 acres. Dwellings permitted, each separate ownership would be limited to 6,500 square feet of above ground living space spread between up to 2 dwellings. And there are 2 dwellings that currently exist on the 4,900 square feet dwelling and a 1,300 square foot guest house. As far as other structures go, this will be the standard terms, except no structures over 500 square feet in size would be permitted within 500 feet of Jarman's Gap Road. That's the yellow hatching. Standard agriculture, standard forestry terms. And one of the things the authority was concerned about when it saw the original proposal was the barn on 23C, the top left. With a small parking area in the farm. And so there were concerns about that parking area being expanded. We put a prohibition on the expansion of the parking area and no new parking areas nearby without authority approval. The proposal also includes 35-foot buffer on Licking Hole Creek. That's the stream furthest north, nearest to the road, and the same buffer on the 3 ponds and the 1 wetland area north of the largest pond. There's currently 1 small shed in one of those buffers, so we would make the exception for that.
Can I ask that you be mindful about the dams on these ponds? I mean, if you put
Of course, yeah.
the dams in the buffers and you have to replace the pond, you got a problem.
Yeah, we've put that dam maintenance shall be permitted. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I just leave them out, but okay. I mean, I would leave out the line across where the dam actually is and just do the U shape, you know.
So staff finds that the donation proposal meets the authority's acceptance criteria and recommends approval. Happy to take any questions. I just need to plug in my laptop.
And it's not in the growth area. You said it was consistent with the plan, but
Correct.
I know there's a growth area boundary out there somewhere.
It's in the rural area.
Okay, all right.
Pretty straightforward.
I move
Yeah.
approval.
Oh, I have a couple questions, just real quick, but just to clarify, so the 3 parcels. Parcel 23 is held in an LLC and the other 2 are the Randy and Mary. Was there a reason why that one's held in an LLC and the other 2 aren't?
You're gonna transfer it to them individually as part of the process.
Oh, so
That
that
would
would
work out.
be, so, right. And then that area to the right adjoining, that's King Family Vineyard, correct? Yeah.
And then just below it, Shamrock Farms.
Another easement.
Also. And then the Baber easement is not far down the road. So
There's a lot of easements.
yeah, and I mean, this is. As easements have started to happen here, more is starting to fill in. Too, there's a bit of a domino effect happening. Out here, which is. Was that it for your
Yeah, that's
questions?
my 2 things.
All right, do you? You wanna read the motion? Okay. Is
So I'll second that.
second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Pretty straightforward. Hour, 5 minutes.
Let's, we're on a roll. Let's keep going.
All right. Okay, you got power.
So next donation proposal is Mr. Van Ryan, again represented by Lee and Rebecca, who this property, again, 190 acres, this time on 29 South, a few miles southwest of Charlottesville. It would eliminate approximately 10 potential dwellings. Natural resources on the property include 110 acres of critical slopes, 120 acres in mountain protection area, 85 acres of soil important for agriculture, and 150 acres of soil listed as important for silviculture. About 2,400 feet of frontage on Route 29, which is an entrance corridor, and about 4,600 feet of shared boundary with existing conservation easements. This property is not in a historic district, but it is opposite Arrowhead Pass, which is on the National Register for Historic Places. The proposed terms of say this amendment, this donation, similar to Caljean, currently 4 parcels under single ownership. The proposal would allow up to 2 separate ownerships with a minimum size of 80 acres. Again, each of those 2 ownerships could have up to 6,500 square feet of space spread between up to 2 dwellings each. There is 1 existing dwelling, 5,600 square feet in that small circle in the middle. Other structures permitted, the proposal would prohibit structures above the 800-foot contour line. That's the gray area in the northwest, and no structures of any size within 400 feet of Route 29. That's the yellow hashed area. Standard agricultural terms except no clearing for agriculture above the 800-foot contour line. Standard forestry terms, standard grading, meters, and a 35-foot agricultural riparian buffer on the streams and the ponds, meaning that currently flows through a pasture fields. Livestock would be permitted in more of a vegetation. Yeah, and has provided a couple of building envelopes, 3 building envelopes, really. The existing circle, center left,
And that's an actual parcel?
this part.
Yeah.
And 2 prospective building envelopes highlighted in red.
That's part of the set of terms, is that you've got those building envelope restrictions.
Correct.
Well, the eventual deed will hold the dwellings to those
Envelopes.
building envelopes.
Okay,
The answer is yes.
that's what I was beginning to think.
And we find that the proposal meets the acceptance criteria and recommend it.
Couple of quick things to mention. As far as that 800-foot line, is the mountain protection area identified in the comprehensive plan. So it wasn't something we just picked up. Town policy to protect the ridge above that elevation. Also, you may wonder why, when we normally give a 500 square foot exception for buildings in that setback along the scenic highway. In this case, that's not a pasture area where you're likely to need a run and shed. It's a sloping wooded area. It's intended to be a wooded visual buffer. Why we did it that way in this particular case.
And you'll say just buildings as opposed to buildings and structures, so that you don't get all messed up with mailboxes, entrances, things. And you don't want to, by mistake, prohibit a mailbox, for example.
Proposal's no structures.
We can adjust that, and if you want to do it in the motion, you can. There's similar language. At least in the riparian buffer terms, you mentioned this before, Jerry, the minor structures such as fences, mailboxes, etc. We've got that language to use, so.
Yeah, I just think we don't want to inadvertently prohibit a nice little entrance and the Van Royens receiving some mail.
Bus stop shed. All right.
I'll make a motion to approve the easement.
Okay. Is there a second? Bruce. Deborah. Is there any further discussion on this? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. Hey, thanks, you guys.
Up here, they appear to use them. They give the post office.
Gee, must we enforce that they do this?
Want to change their life dramatically.
Maybe some sweet day, the Daily Progress will actually again deliver a newspaper.
Next
Bye-bye.
one.
No, that's
See you.
not gonna happen.
Okay.
Still-
Mr. Blaine is representing the donor.
I think you've sat at the table before.
Probably once or twice.
Holman is, I spoke to him, he's sorry. Yeah, first.
Final donation proposal is Mr. Coleman. The location here, the northeast of Charlottesville, along the Gordonsville Road on 50th Road. It is 21 acres, give or take. With approximately 3 potential dwellings eliminated. Natural resources include 18 acres of important agricultural soil. And approximately 2,800 feet of boundary with existing conservation easements. You can see that highlighted green there, those are all existing easements. And the main dwelling is a contributing structure to the Southampton rural historic. Our restrictions for this proposal would be no subdivision, no willful demolition of the existing dwelling. It's currently 2,300 square feet. May be expanded or replaced if something happens to it, up to 4,000 square feet. Also, the second dwelling, an accessory dwelling unit permitted up to 1,000 square feet. To be contained within a barn is the intention of the landowner. The barn isn't built yet. He intends to build a barn and put a dwelling on the second floor. Other structures, mostly standard terms, would also permit the existing small shed next to the dwelling to be converted into a kind of bed and bath guest cottage that would not count as a dwelling, would not be furnished for cooking, up to 650 square feet. Otherwise, standard terms and no riparian buffers, is no streams. So staff is requesting feedback on this proposal because it does not meet the density requirements of the authority's acceptance criteria. Of course, the authority is welcome to make any motion that it would like.
So I just point out a couple quick things. Pretty familiar with this property. It's not only does it abut Old Keswick, a large each property, thanks to BOF, I believe,
This was Sally Carl.
Sally Carl's house. It also, on the other side of the road is Castle Hill Cidery, which is a Nature Conservancy easement. It's on a knoll on top of a hill, and so there were multiple developments that they were pretty significant visual impact to an area that is largely protected.
So is it, like, it's on a knoll, but it's flat enough. You could pretty easily put 3 houses back there in that open field.
And it's that area, that stretch of road is probably the most densely eased area in the state of Virginia. So this is an important addition to that.
James, I was interested because I'm familiar with it too, but that the 21.7 acres was the original tract. It's never been divided, parcel 7. So that was 1979. That gave it 5. Did it give it 5? So how did it get to the 3? Because you're counting the cottages there and.
Right. It has potential for 5 dwellings. Under the easement, it would have potential for 2 dwellings.
Okay.
Main dwelling and the.
This is kind of the last of the Mohicans sitting there. That's kind of cute. Yeah.
Does the barn apartment that doesn't have a kitchen, stove or whatever, does that count as a dwelling then?
Barn apartment would be a dwelling, and then the other one is basically a shed or a shed conversion to,
But it doesn't meet the 5 elements. And so,
right, exactly. It doesn't meet the
I'm
5
getting that
elements.
going.
Zoning definition. Well, the way we deal with that is just to say it couldn't be converted.
just to tone
Oh,
it
I
down.
see, I see, I see. So that's, okay. Gotcha.
But
Let's clean up some old stale zoning.
I'll make a motion to approve the easement as presented.
Second.
all right. Is there? I'm not trying to belabor. But I just feel like it's worth noting that this is a step away from our 40 acre per dwelling. Just, rule of thumb, but for good reason. That have been represented.
Yeah, I feel like the restrictions on the dwellings that bump it over
Yeah.
are sufficiently restrictive and
Yeah.
I don't think the spirit of the guidelines is put on its head the way I did feel the other one was.
Okay, I just wanted that noted. Also, is there any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? It's unanimous.
And maybe the minutes could reflect some of this discussion about the guidelines and so that if we have to go back to this as a precedent someday,
Right.
we can read that we felt comfortable because there were, one's an apartment and one's a shed type thing.
I think the proximity to other conserved land is.
And that too, yeah.
And I think we're seeing more of that as they kind of filling in the donut holes.
I was gonna say, there aren't a lot of these left. I mean, they've been scooped up by builders and, if they've got any kind of development rights on them.
See that? Down.
Thank you.
All right, is there any new business?
I don't.
All right, is there any old business? Move to adjourn? So moved. Second?
Second.
No second.
Okay, good night, ladies and gentlemen. Off to a slow start. Quiet.
Caught up.
There you
Hit
go.
a sprint.
I'd say there are other meetings too, and I think people just like to second it. It has the most enthusiastic second.
Brian, how's everything in your world?
Being a grandfather is fun.
You got our
Silver hair.
Right?
Jack, they're gonna have their second.
How you been? You all right?
We're busy.
How old is
Keep short, so that keeps us.
Are you?
One next month.
Yeah,